I'm Julie Hiipakka. I, until recently, led part of our human capital research and sensing offering, where I studied learning and leadership research, as well as looking at how organizations were starting on the skills-based journey. I actually recently joined the workforce transformation practice so that I could attempt to help clients actually apply this research and practice. So it's lovely to be with all of you. Sona.
Thank you, Julie. So I'm Sona Manzo, and I'm a partner in our workforce transformation practice, and I focus very specifically on the talent equation. So talent acquisition, talent management, the exciting developments around things like talent marketplace, and how are we seeing skills activate. So many of the aspects that are critical for our organizations to respond to the needs of the day. So we're delighted to be here with you today. I will say that I also lead our alliance with Eightfold. So from that perspective, it's been really fun partnering with Kamal and Ashu and Jen and the entire team and with Dana to really see how this has been evolving and the impact it's been making on our joint clients. So we'll share some of those vignettes as we go along.
Fantastic.
Next slide.
There we go. So the title of this session is, how do we go from firefighting to navigating? And so some of you who have seen me present before know that I sometimes go to the very literal. So this is us, a lot of us in HR and frankly in the business, when we care about our people, have spent a lot of time reacting to the events of the last several years. And certainly there have been a lot of events. Part of what we're going to spend time on today is walking you through some of the data that we've seen with regard to what's behind all this firefighting and how our organization's starting to go about making the shift to taking more of that thoughtful navigating approach, which I want to qualify with does not mean that you have a plan and you stick without regard to what happens to that plan. When we talk about navigating, we're talking about agility and responsiveness and reacting to what's around you. Just like Google Maps, can I say Google Maps? A large company's internet mapping tool will see there's an accident and reroute you. We want to help you see a couple ways that you all can do that in your work with your organizations and your people.
And for me, this picture kind of reminds me when I was young and I watched Mr. Rogers, and he would always say, when there's a crisis, what do? You look for the helping people. So the helpers, we are those helpers, right? From a human capital perspective, we have to be agile, as Julie mentioned. We have to have situational fluency. We have to sense what's going on around us, the people that are impacted. And then we have to bring our tools, just like the firefighters do, right? We have to understand what tools there are, always be on the lookout for new ones, and then respond as we progress. So doom and gloom, why is the screen black, right? Well, we've all been facing tremendous challenges over the last few years. And so we know that that's led to some particular impacts, regardless of industry, role, et cetera, has really had an impact on individuals, right? And so this sense of mass burnout and exhaustion, we wanted to understand that a little bit better. And so we were continuing to sense the market and do some research, and we know that these results are really, really quite tragic in so many ways, right? When we see the number of people that have been impacted from a mental health perspective, from an ability to cope. So how is that manifested? Well, in many ways, it's manifested into impetus into the Great Resignation. And so some of the other things that we've seen in this tremendous time is people stepping back and saying, okay, if I'm so challenged by this time, what is it that I want to focus on? And so it's given people the opportunity to reflect and make a lot of changes. And a huge part of that is the great reimagination in the way we're trying to term it, in looking at this and trying to put a positive spin on it. So yes, tremendous attrition. You know, this stat, 4.2, that was back in August. It peaked in November at 4.5, but still really high, right? In February, 4.4 million Americans transitioned out of their jobs. So great change, yet great opportunity for us to understand how to help continue to make change and identify how to support this. And a lot of transition from a geographic perspective as well. So this concept of the Great Resignation, right, looking at the people that are quitting, but also looking at this from an opportunity perspective. So how can we understand what's going on in the marketplace, whether it's impacting women, tremendous number of women making changes or actually even considering leaving. We know generationally there are differences in terms of people's appetite and interest in moving. And we know that people who aren't engaged in their work have, of course, a much higher propensity to leave. So what do we do to turn that around? Certainly there are some themes that are important, right? Understanding that inflexible work arrangements are a critical decision point for people, unlike any time in our history, right? Making sure that we help our employees feel valued. This is another key theme that came across. 54% didn't feel valued by their employers, right? So it's hard to stay when you're facing all these other crises and not feeling valued. And then being connected to your team and the sense of belonging, all really important aspects. So we'll talk a little bit more about how we can start weaving these into a roadmap for the future. But I'd like to turn it back over to Julie to talk a little bit about reskilling and how we see the connectivity to this.
Yeah, so are we having fun yet? Because that's a lot of somewhat concerning data. And yet, in the last few years, we've also been having this discussion about reskilling. And we heard the nice fella from E&Y talking about it earlier. There is no doubt that everyone is needing to evolve what they are doing on a day-to-day basis because work itself has changed and will continue to change so fundamentally. So I'm not going to read all these stats to you. It's just, and some of this is probably numbers that you're familiar with. But it really points to, we know how essential skills are to work. You all wouldn't be here if you didn't believe that. And yet so many of our organizations don't yet have visibility into what those skills are. Meanwhile, and I think this is another element that's informing the great is that our people have an endless appetite to want to try to do new things. And we sometimes forget that. We sometimes underestimate how much people really want and crave new learning and new ways of doing things. Almost half of our workers have said, hey, if I'm going to be with an organization that invests in me, I may stick around. And even our frontline workers, this particular last stat from, I think this is a Microsoft frontline worker study, they're not afraid of technology. They're excited about it, and they're excited about the work opportunities that could bring their way. So think about it. We've got all this stuff happening where everyone is sort of reckoning their relationships with their employers, and work is shifting, and what we need to do on the job is shifting, and we all need to learn. So what do we do about that besides cry?
No need to cry.
So we think, and Sona's going to talk a little bit about part of it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it. We're like a double act today. How you make this shift from firefighting to navigating is by making work a lot more flexible. And we're going to talk about that in two ways. The first is, of course, hybrid work. How do we give people more agency in where they're working, when they're working? And then we give them more agency and we empower them around the work itself. How do we give people choices in what skills they demonstrate in the work, what skills they get to learn through the work, and what are they actually interested in doing? Because there's a lot of things that I can do that I don't necessarily want to do. Cleaning my house. We were talking earlier about like weird jobs that we've held. I spent 6 months writing legal briefs for the Florida Department of Transportation. That is not a job I ever want to do again, but it's a skill. So how do we connect people with what energizes them, and how do we help our organizations consistently tap into that? Back to you. It's like a news report.
There we go. So our first theme, flexibility, right? When we talk about the impact of what's been happening and a lot of the factors that have been driving the Great Resignation, we know that workforce flexibility is really becoming table stakes, right? Hold up your microphone. Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. Yesterday when we were practicing, we had the ones on our color. So agility, it's all about agility. So when we think about cross-industry sensing and we're trying to understand exactly what's been happening here, we know a tremendous amount of workers really are looking for sustainment of the flexibility that they have had. And this is, of course, particular to that population of the workforce that has been working at home for the last few years. And we've seen and we've proven that the impact and the ability on our teams to work together remotely, to have actually increased productivity in some cases, and increased well-being in some regards, has been significant. So it has had a dramatic impact on individuals as they're thinking about what next roles they want. And when you look at that, 1 in 3 workers saying they would not want to work for an employer who would require them to be on site full time. It's a pretty dramatic change in terms of the ability to attract workforce and to retain a workforce. So we really need to be reckoning with that. And then when we think about being prepared for that, are organizations truly prepared? Now, yes, we've made a lot of progress, and organizations have teams and strategies that are working on this, yet many of them are still concerned that they're not well prepared for the hybrid environment, or they're still grappling with what should be our corporate strategy. And we've actually seen over time, over the last year, some organizations who really were strongly saying that they were going to come back to the office full time as soon as possible, have to change their strategy and their corporate mandates to respond to this, right? And others who thought they were going to go all in and let everyone work from anywhere at any time have thought, well, from a cultural implication, we need to have something in the middle. So there's a lot going on still to bring that all back together. But really, thinking about what the impact is into culture is something that's high on everyone's mind. And certainly the impact to individuals from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective is also another attribute that we need to be considering when we're putting these strategies together. So this will be a journey that'll continue, but it does really connect into what we're looking at as we move towards the future. And again, a lot of stats here, you'll have these slides, but when you think about different industry groups, there are some key differences. And the stats here, the first one, 68% of the clients looking to operate in a hybrid mode, 81% of technology companies, really no surprise there, right? And then a mostly remote environment, again, no surprise, mostly technology companies, but I think a lot of sensing and statistics around supporting this approach. And then, of course, this impact, we talked about culture, and we'll talk a little bit more about the transparency and the way in which we can connect individuals into the organization, and indeed, throughout their career at moments that matter, by adopting more of a skills-based strategy. So what do we learn from all of this? Really, there are 4 key themes. I think we shared, kind of high level some of them, but workforce flexibility is key, as we've been talking about. Meaningful work and connection, certainly. Growth opportunities, upskilling and reskilling is certainly a part of that equation. And then trust and leadership. We know those are the 4 key pillars. So as HR and business leaders, being able to take these 4 pillars and start to incorporate those into our structure and strategy and dialogue, the training for our managers, it starts as early as employment branding. When you think about meaningful work and connection, what are the kind of messages that we're putting out into the marketplace in regards to our organization, what it's like to go through the process with us? How do you connect in with us? How do you understand what your work will be like? Well, certainly having a tool like Eightfold at the front end can help individuals really get a clearer sense of how their skills that they already have connect in with opportunities that an organization is presenting. And I really think that foundationally this is changing the game in terms of talent acquisition. And I've been involved in talent acquisition since the mid-90s, when we were looking at what we thought, the war for talent continues to be different iterations of that. But the ability for individuals to actually quickly identify using AI the positions that are relevant to their skills and see how they match to that at the front end, game changing, not only for them to find those opportunities, understand how they connect, but for employers, it's also changing the game because it's kind of knocking down those barriers to entry when we know that predominantly in certain categories, we've had difficulty attracting and getting people to apply for positions. Females, for example, only apply to positions if they meet a very, very high threshold, 80 to 95% of the skills before they'll apply, versus the male population, you might say 30%, hey, Great, I'll pursue that opportunity. So we're trying to help inform that and tear down some of these barriers, and using technology has been instrumental in that. I know there's one organization that's adopted this strategy who had a 75% increase in their female applicants complete and go through the process through this new technology. So certainly aspects of technology that bring to bear, but other things are more culturally structured. So at Deloitte, we like to say we're making work better for humans and humans better at work. How do we bring these constructs together? And I think growth opportunities is another key connection point, Julie, right? When we think about the way in which we are talking with individuals in our organizations, historically, a lot of it was through mentoring and contacts and looking for ways to navigate your career. It was certainly true in consulting, and it's certainly true in many organizations, right? But now, when we have the ability to give people agency to understand how their skills and their aspirations come together and help them chart the course to start capitalizing on the opportunities to reach their potential, that is another huge game changer, right? And so when we look at this employee journey, we bring people into the organization who already have a greater sense of connectivity, a sense that they're on the right path. Then we give them opportunities. They come in to understand how they can connect in. And those opportunities, by the way, aren't just learning. And I think we talked a little bit about this in one of the sessions early today. Certainly learning, whether that's in-person learning or e-learning, is critical. Always will be critical, but that on-the-job experience is so powerful. And so connecting in through talent marketplaces, gig opportunities within our organizations, connection with mentors through talent marketplaces, all of these lead to an environment that is inspiring for individuals. And again, helping them chart that path in a really different way. And it's based on skills. So let's go ahead and move on to some of the skills connectivity.
I am here to perhaps state a couple things that are obvious. This is how we've run a lot of our talent processes up to now / a few years ago. And this approach doesn't provide the agility or the flexibility that we and our organizations need to have meaningful work and flexibility, to foster that sense of trust and transparency and everything else that we're trying to do. I hate saying click the thing. So yes, we are obviously fans and believers in the notion that becoming more skills-based in your talent practices is the way to go. And it's because we move away from being so linear to this ongoing process of giving people opportunities to experience different types of work with different people, matching them to those opportunities in a way that goes far beyond who do you know and who have you worked with in the past, which is a huge barrier to different types of people with different experiences being considered. And then, of course, putting some of the technology to work for us in helping somebody think beyond their own perspective on what they could do to maybe some other areas. So we have a view on what that actually looks like. How do you actually become a skills-based organization? Ta-da. So we see this as the new operating system for work. We're going to be publishing some research later on this year and a survey of HR executives, business executives, and workers is going to be launched, I want to say in the next month or so, depending on the survey. And it's our first effort to really collect more meaningful data around where are people on this journey. But what we expect to find is that organizations are tackling how to become skills-based in both directions. So they're trying to get at it through the spokes of talent practices. And then some of them are thinking about how do we really transform our ways of engaging as a business and an organization through more of a skills hub. And what I want to focus on here is these 4 ingredients of this hub, because when I think about what is that operating system for work, or how do you really move from those more traditional talent practices to becoming skills-based, you need more than just a really cool technology tool like Eightfold in order for that to be successful. So we talk about all 4 of these elements, and a big part of how we partner with clients is in helping them through working all this stuff. So talent philosophy, if anybody's weirded out by seeing that here, it's actually one of the most important parts of the conversation. We can build the best tools in the world. HR can have lovely ambitions around wanting to make things different, but we also need our business leaders to be clear on what they believe to be true about talent and how does tapping into more potential actually help us as a business. So that philosophy has to speak to skills. It doesn't have to speak to skills in terms of the word, but it has to speak to mobility and potential and opportunity. And then, of course, you need a common language inside your organization for skills. We don't go to a client and say, this is your framework precisely. We go and try to help understand in their world, based on the work that is being done, the people doing that work, what is the right common language for that organization to use so that everyone understands each other. And we know that mature organizations are 7 times more likely to invest in figuring out what that common language is. Creates really interesting discussions where you argue about, well, what's a skill really mean? Do we need competencies? How many levels and how complex should our skill framework be? Do we want to rate people on proficiency? What is that proficiency scale? All of those things are part of this conversation around that framework. And then, of course, you gotta have the tools. You're gonna hear from a lot more people about how great that technology can be. I would continue to emphasize, as I said before, but I love repeating myself, yes, you need the technology, but these other things are gonna make that technology work exponentially better. And this last factor, which is probably the least sexy thing to talk about, governance. How do we manage this thing? How do we keep it real? How do we decide what's important? Who's responsible for skills? Those are all big questions. And going into this, recognizing that those are questions you need to try to answer and continue to answer, because this is not a one and done exercise. We all know, because you're here, you don't create a skills list one time. You don't create a governance approach one time. This is ongoing work. We see lots of evidence that our most effective HR organizations see all these things as ongoing practices, not processes, and governance is absolutely one of those things. Let's keep going. I want to make sure we get to questions, so I'll try to keep this fairly brief. When we think about the journey that clients are taking to become skills-based, there is a bit of a flow to it. Now, again, we're doing some research over the summer to get a better handle on if this is actually how it is playing out now compared to when we first put this progression together. But we have clients who are at the bottom looking at, okay, how do I become more skills-based in my hiring practices? What is skills-based learning, which is a very popular point of entry because that's where I spend a lot of time talking to learning leaders about this. Everyone, of course, is interested in mobility, talking about opportunity and talent marketplaces. Once you do that, a lot of these organizations start to recognize, well, this impacts a whole bunch of other stuff, and we need to be smarter about how we plan for it. How do we set up our job architectures? How do we think about selecting people? And there's a lot fewer clients at the top levels of this chain right now, and if you feel your organization is dealing with some of these more thorny issues like rewards and performance management, and really thinking about how skills will help you reimagine your relationship with your stakeholders, whether they're shareholders or customers. I'd love to talk to you. But what we really see is that once folks start on the bottom, once they're starting to think about some of these talent processes, there's really a need in order for this to be truly successful and transformational for you to rethink all aspects of talent. So definitely stay tuned for more coming from us later on this year on what is this actually looking like in practice. I'm really interested too.
It's been really interesting to watch the conversations evolve because as we talked about, these ones here, foundational, are ones that we've been talking about for a while and making progress in. The number of organizations who want to engage and talk about workforce planning has just grown dramatically in the last, I would say, 6 months, right? So it's another area that you think about in terms of, again, foundationally, how do we incorporate that into the process? And a lot of excitement about bringing all this together and activating that. And then, certainly, culture and DEI. We can't say enough about the way in which I think things have progressed so much that is getting kind of infused in the conversations that we're having on an ongoing basis. So really great to see. Workforce ecosystems is an interesting one, and it's one that we at Deloitte have been doing a lot of research in. Robin Jones, who's the partner who leads our workforce transformation practice, is actually going to be publishing a book shortly. And this stems from a lot of insights and thinking about how things are evolving. And when we think about talent and talent pools, really we have three, right? We have individuals in the marketplace that we're connecting with and aspiring to bring in. We have, of course, the individuals who work with us already. And then we have our contingent workforce, our gig workforce. And so when we think about those and the continuum, all the possibilities in between, that workforce ecosystem and the way that's evolving is just critical in terms of, again, understanding the skills and putting together a strategy so that that's not a disconnected approach in the organization. So I think lots to come on that.
So we want to make sure we have a few minutes for questions. Before we do that, we wanted to throw out some questions to all of you in terms of things that you can think about as you continue on this journey. So again, sexy topic of governance. Is your organization really thinking about governance and looking at your talent philosophy, assuming that you even have one, to really support this much more flexible, empowering, worker-focused way of being? And data, how ready is your data for a really phenomenal tool to come in and do things with it, like explore skills adjacencies and help you try to anticipate and predict what skills might be available to you? We see that the vast majority of organizations are still pretty low on their people analytics maturity. And so getting your data clean before you start to engage with a partner is a really, really important step. Sona, maybe you can voice over these last two.
Well, and I was going to say, yes, and I think that there are organizations who are looking at their data and saying, we have so much data, how do we use insights to try and get that data into the solutions and start to activate it, right? And actually AI is a great way to do that. So lots to do there for sure. And then how can skills help workers find meaningful work, growth, and connectivity? Again, back to those themes of the day. When we're looking to build an organization that really can speak about their purpose, can articulate their culture, but really to have people feel that culture and participate in that culture, we know that we're going to have a much better experience at work. We're going to have a better opportunity to be a productive organization and retain our talent. And then how do you cultivate the flexibility balance with empowerment? And when you look at workers and organizations coming together to do that, I think we've seen a lot of different types of strategies that have been tried and are evolving, and this is going to be the work of the future. But certainly continuing to strike that balance and empower our individuals in our organizations to chart their future while giving them flexibility and achieving our mission is what we're all aspiring to do. So it's been our pleasure to share this content with you. Of course, would love you to connect in with us. We have lots about human capital trends online, and our Alliance site with Eightfold has many of our other speaking sessions that we've done. So lots of content to share if you're interested in delving into these topics further. And we'll open up for questions.
Do we have time for like one or two?
I think we can if we're quick.
Okay, go.
If not, people can find you.
Hi, Carly.
First time, long time. So I was going to ask a question about DEI, and I think you really nailed it. But thinking about inclusion, something you said, Sona, the connection between skills and aspirations. What have you seen organizations do culturally, systemically, to really enable that connection between a skill and an aspiration to benefit DEI, particularly the I in the DEI?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Carly. And when you think about giving people the opportunity to feel included, there are many aspects of that. But one of the things that we know in trying these new solutions, in particular having a talent marketplace, or what we term at Deloitte often an opportunity marketplace, is giving transparency to allow people to start connecting in new ways. And that in of itself can help with inclusion, right? So, but it is important for leaders to be thinking about that. How are we identifying those areas within our organization that we can bring together? It's both a messaging and a mentoring aspect in providing the tools and transparency. But we've seen a real difference when you open up that transparency and you talk about what an organization is doing to address that, can go a long way. The other thing I'll mention is just as one of the partners that was highlighted this morning with 110, I think, the organizations that are connecting into the 110 strategy and using that to help bring in new talent to the organization that might not traditionally have had those opportunities, and then building a model where they can feel included and be able to grow in their career is another way that we're really seeing that being addressed.